to all of you to our today's AIES talk, because our institute, Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, tries to organize almost every week such a talk with prominent people. And I do not only welcome you, but also our today's speaker, Mr. Ambassador, former Minister Borys Ivanovich Tarasyuk. A hearty welcome to you. Before we start into the discussion, of course, I want to introduce Borys Tarasyuk a little bit. He, for sure, can be called the Mr. Foreign Policy of Ukraine, because he has not only an outstanding career, but certainly unique experience in foreign policy. Borys Tarasyuk was born in the 1st January of 1949. He studied at Shevchenko University in Ukraine, international relations and international law, and started a diplomatic career. And immediately after independence, this was a very steep career. Already in 1992, 1 year after independence, he became the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine. And after 3 years, he went to Brussels, became ambassador for Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and especially also he was the representative, Ukrainian representative for NATO, which of course always had quite some importance for Ukraine. And after these 3 years, he became foreign minister for Ukraine for another 3 years. And it was a pleasure to meet him at many opportunities, because you can imagine how difficult this job was, especially in the first years of independence of Ukraine. Then, after this first term, this was under Prime Minister Yushchenko. He had some difficulties with President Kuchma, as far as I remember. He went out of the office, and he, of course, also came back. But in the meantime, he founded an institute also for European and transatlantic cooperation, where he was the president and very active also in enforcing those relationships. In 2005, he came back as a foreign minister until 2007. He was the advisor not only for Prime Minister Tymoshenko and Viktor Yanukovych. Was a very specific period also. And afterwards, he did not stop his career, but he went into Parliament, Verkhovna Rada, and over there he was the chairman of the Committee for European Integration, and also chairman, vice chairman for the Foreign Relations Committee, and insofar also made a job in foreign policy from the parliamentary side. And since 2019, after also having become the chairman of a party and so on, since 2019, he has become Ukraine's permanent representative to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. The Council of Europe, where he had led 25 years before Ukraine, and now he is able to fill this function. Okay, it's a great pleasure to have him here, and I really want to welcome him once again. If I start my questions, maybe I will not start with the nowadays crisis, but I would like to start maybe a little bit with the question of stability of the country. If we look back to the time of independence in 1991, then the Orange Revolution, 2004, the Maidan, 2014. Of course, there always were periods of more or less stability, but always quite some instability. And at the same time, this was not only in the political area, but you also could find many, many questions on the economic side. The BSP of Ukraine still is lower than it used to be 10 years ago, or maybe even 20 years ago. Of course, also due to the question of separation, independence is not just a simple and a single way in a single direction. And therefore, it was quite important, probably, that in 2019, Ukraine, the people elected a new president and a new parliament with a very strong majority the country had not seen before. This certainly brought a situation that went into the direction of more stability. And the president was very ambitious. He wanted to make democratic reforms, economic reforms. He wanted to fight against corruption. He wanted to have a solution for Donbass and tried to establish new relations with Russia. Very, very ambitious. Of course, reality always is a little bit different to one's goals, what the goals one can have, you know. And so far, my question is to you now, where does Ukraine stand now? How stable is the country in reality?
Grüß Gott, and thank you for inviting me to this very prestigious forum and webinar. I would like to express gratitude to you, Werner, as my friend of many years, if not decades. I enjoyed our cooperation and our discussion we used to have in the past, and I'm gladly participating in this webinar under your guidance. Well, as to Ukraine, how stable is Ukraine economically, politically? I would describe through 30 years of restored independence of Ukraine, that Ukraine had a policy graphically like a sinusoid curve, that is with its ups and downs, and much depended on who was elected the president of Ukraine, what kind of parliament was elected, much depended on this. I would say that being one of the most promising, economically, one of the most promising republics of the former Soviet Union, according to the Deutsche Bank analysis, Ukraine lost its economic, so to say, actives because of the, on one hand, the rivalry between the opposing political forces, the communists and the Democrats. All this led to the inconsistent foreign and domestic policy, with some reforms being done and some drawbacks. And in the foreign policy, the debates were concentrated over either Ukraine should be westward oriented or eastward oriented. And this uncertain policy, uncertain situation, which was based, by the way, on the public opinion polls, indicated that Ukrainian society was not united over the foreign and domestic policy issues. So the considerable change has happened immediately after Russia made aggression in 2014 against Ukraine, and this aggression consolidated Ukrainian society. Well, including those who were hesitating, either Russia or the West. So after Russian aggression, it became understandable to the majority of the population that Russia is not our friend, that our friends are in the West. And this has considerably changed the public opinion attitude, as a result of which the majority of population started to support NATO and EU membership. Now, this is not a questionable objective. This is objective which was even enshrined in the Ukrainian constitution, which says that our objective in foreign policy is the membership in NATO and the European Union. So, and since this is in Ukrainian constitution, I hardly believe that any political force may change it. So this is our objective. As to the internal policy, internally, Ukraine and Ukrainian leadership many years were dependent on Russia energy supply, gas and oil. And this energy supply became the issue of strategic importance and of strategic choice. Many Ukrainian leaders in the past were in favor of getting cheap Russian gas and oil instead of concentrating on the economic reforms. And for almost 3 decades, the discussions were taking place over how quick and how deep the reforms must be. Now there is no doubt with the new president, as you referred to, was elected by the majority of 73% of voters. So this was the first time ever in Ukrainian history that the president got together 73%. Now this figure is much lower, but still it is some 25%. So the current president is the leader among possible, according to the public opinion polls, among the possible contenders for the position of the head of the state. His political force, the servant of the people, also is the leader in sympathies of the Ukrainian, those polled. About the stability of Ukrainian political and economic life, I would say that Russia for many years was one of the most considerable and influential factor. This situation has changed dramatically after the Russian invasion in 2014. And now, but still, we have the the substantial part of the society which is supporting those who are, so to say, pro-Russian. And this is together around 15%. This is not as it used to be at the beginning of our restored independence, when the communists and pro-Russian forces were prevailing. Now they have hardly 15%. This is the most they have. So there is no chances for the pro-Russian or communist forces to come back. The issue of the reforms, this was the most difficult issue for any Ukrainian leader and any Ukrainian political force. There were attempts to, to combine the reforms and the evolution in time. So this happened to be a failed policy, and it is understandable that only reforms can make Ukraine a modern state, economically sustainable state, and now all the efforts are being directed at economic reforms. The fight against corruption is one of the priority for Ukrainian leadership, although still, according to the democratic procedures, we still have in very influential legal bodies like the Constitutional Court, people who were appointed at the time of Yanukovych, a pro-Russian leader. So they are creating the obstacles, and they even have created recently a crisis, a constitutional crisis, by their unconstitutional decisions. So this issue is now under discussion with the Venice Commission, which is situated, although the name, but which is situated here in Strasbourg. And we are in close contacts with the Venice Commission in order to modify and reform our legal system. So this is one of the most important issues. According to the public opinion polls, the influence of oligarchs in Ukraine is still very high. But despite of the predictions, the current president is trying to avoid the control by the oligarchs on him politically. To say it in common, Ukraine is now consolidated more over the issues where to go, strategically to go to NATO and the European Union membership. Although we understand that there are obstacles on this way, and first of all, we need the consensus from among member states of NATO and the European Union, which is not currently the case. So we are working and we are trying to be ready for the challenges we are facing because of Russian recent military provocations.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for this explanation. I'm sure that this ambition, especially for economic reform, is extremely important. What I see, the tendency for privatization in industry and also land reform and the possibility to sell land and to buy land for farmers certainly will be extremely important in order to strengthen private initiative and bring the country forward economically. At the other hand, from the political side, what I see, of course, as you expressed it very clearly, the same way I saw it in 2014, when Russia invaded parts of Ukraine, it shaped at the same time the Ukrainian identity in a very clear way that never had existed before. And insofar, the nation seems to be consolidated. I mean, if we look at the ethnical situation, you can say around about three quarters, around about 75% ethnic Ukrainians, around about 20% maybe do have a Russian background. And insofar, what you said about this sphere of influence of pro-Russian groups with a limit of around about 15% looks very reasonable also to me due to the ethnic situation. But still, as you mentioned, if you want to go and look forward to EU or NATO membership. Of course, there are quite some challenges ahead. One of them certainly is the fact that parts of the country are occupied by Russian forces. And so far, my question would be, I mean, what is the reality? How good is the chance really to gain back, to regain Donetsk and Luhansk, and especially Crimea, of course?
Well, this is one of the major challenge, and not only security challenge for Ukraine, but economic and political challenge to Ukraine. And as you said, as you referred to, part of Donetsk and Lugansk region, as well as the Crimea, are being occupied by Russians. We, from the very beginning, since 2014, entered the process of settlement, thanks to the leadership of Germany and France. Unfortunately, from the very beginning, it was obvious for us, and for me in particular, that the formulas which were set forth back September 2014 and January 2015 did not work. So unfortunately, the so-called Normandy or Minsk process is not producing the result. And from my point of view, the mistake was done from the very beginning, when the United States was not invited to this peaceful settlement process. And these were the lost years and the lost opportunities. From my personal experience, I know that the United States might have played a very important role in a possible settlement. And only the United States is the only country which may create the balance with Russia. There are no similar country in the world. So that's why I was and I am of the opinion that this was a mistake not to invite the United States from the very beginning. So now, taking into account that Normandy and Minsk process is not producing a desirable result, that the ceasefire which was reached summer last year doesn't work because of Russia and its mercenaries and proxies. So this is a very serious problem. So since March we were witnessing, and the outside world, the massive build-up of Russian military presence over our eastern border and in the Crimea. As a result of this provocative build-up of military might, we have around 100,000 Russian military along our eastern border and in the Crimea. So this is the largest formation since 2014, when Russia openly invaded Ukraine in the east. So, one may expect that this military grouping may be enforced in the near future by additional some 10,000 to 100 existing. So, and this is in combination with Russian propaganda, which is not concentrating only on occupied territories, but in the countries of free world. In Austria, in Germany, in France, and in any other NATO and EU member state. So only recently the European Union undertook the efforts to neutralize Russian propaganda in countries of the European Union. we were warning from the very beginning that Russian influence, informational influence in Western countries is too high. And the Western countries were not paying adequate attention to this threat. In some country, even there is a movement which is referred to as Putin Versteher. This is a very dangerous situation that we are witnessing in our friendly countries. The problem with Russian military buildup is in the following. Nobody knows what is in the mind of Putin. Only Putin may say what are his eventual plans. But of course, I don't think that he has only one plan. That is long proclaimed objective to get Ukraine under full Russian control. Taking into account the Russian policy, the recent policy of Russia, one may, and I may refer to some objectives which might be wrong or right objectives for Russia to reach. Russia is wishing to reach concessions from Ukraine. So this is the major objective. And these concessions, the ultimate objective is to subordinate Ukraine to Russia. So this was the policy of Russia since the restoration of independence of Ukraine. Among other objectives of Russia, small objectives, that is to get water supply for the Crimea from Ukrainian Dnieper River, which used to be one of the reasons why in '56 Crimea was referred to the control of Ukraine, because it was not sustainable economically, energetically, water supply to solve on its own under Russia. So that's why Ukraine assumed the responsibility over Crimea. And of course, Russia is seeking the political concessions from Ukraine, and they are referring to the part of the Minsk arrangements, that is the part of making concessions in the Ukrainian constitution about the privileged rights of Donbas region, or Donetsk and occupied areas of Donetsk and Lugansk. Another possible objective of Russia is to military political blackmail of the West. Russians are in a way testing how far NATO and the European Union countries are going to be close to Ukraine, to defend Ukraine, and not only in the means of solidarity, but with the armaments and training. Russians are trying to test the United West, whether they are ready to oppose Russian policy, Russian aggressive policy. So for Russia, one of the objectives is a geopolitical bargaining. As you know, Russia is very sensitive to its status. It's lost the status of one of the big seven. It lost the status of a big power, but at the same time, the ambitions of Putin and of Russian leadership is again to establish Russia as the most influential force. For Russia, this may lead to destroy close ties between the United States and the European Union, which was very dangerous during the previous US administration. Now it seemed to me that the new US administration learned lessons, and the relationship are being improving between the United States and Russia and the European Union, and this is yet another concern for Russia. And another objective which might be calculated, that is not to allow rapprochement between Ukraine and NATO, not to allow Ukraine to join NATO. So, and this is one of the blackmail Russia is using, that this is so-called red line for Russia. But it cannot overreach the Ukrainian consolidation of Ukrainian society, and determination of the major, majority of members of NATO and the European Union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for this clear analysis. I mean, of course, the fact that around about 100,000 Russian soldiers are very close, very near the Ukrainian border. Joseph Borrell even spoke about 150,000 soldiers. Then you have the fact that more than 50 fighter aircraft are situated only at Crimean Peninsula. That Russia is moving at least 10 maritime vessels from the Caspian Sea to the Black Sea. That it more or less closed also the Azov Sea, you know. Nobody can pass now the bridge or the Strait of Kerch. And insofar, this certainly looks very serious. And if I question myself, you know, what could be reasons for this, of course, due to the old rule that every foreign policy is internal policy, there might be also domestic reasons for Putin looking forward to elections in fall, in autumn, and the polls are maybe not so positive, so that a signal also for the Russian people, signal to Russian nationalism could be one of the reasons. But certainly, I would absolutely agree that the intimidation of the Ukrainian government certainly is the foremost reason to do so. And maybe also a little bit a reassurance to his Russophile partners that still exist in Ukraine. Maybe also a message for President Biden, who not only seems to be, but surely is acting on a stricter course towards Russia, you know, a signal that would mean if you will make troubles for me, you can be sure I will make troubles and bring troubles to you as a president. And maybe also, this is the last reason for me, you know, just to organize a real exercise for a real possible, a real military action, if there should be someday a real opportunity for such a thing, could be a reason. How do you see it, and how do you see the chance, you know, under these circumstances, to re-establish a reasonable relationship between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I cannot but agree with what you've said before, and there are several factors which may stabilize the relationship between Moscow and Kiev, although, however, tense they are. First of all, these factors are the following. The relationship between Ukraine and Russia depends on political will of Putin. So this is first of all. And it looks like there is no political will of Putin. And another reason which may lead to the desired result, including Ukrainian-Russian rapprochement, this is the unity among democratic countries, among NATO and EU member states. So this together may create a situation which will force Putin to abandon his provocative policy and aggressive policy towards Ukraine. So one of the objectives which may lead to the Ukraine-Russia rapprochement is obviously without any reservations, end of occupation of Ukrainian lands. That is the regions of Donetsk, Lugansk Oblast and the Crimea. So only this may be a prerequisite for the normalization of relationship between our countries. And of course, this may only be done with withdrawal of Russian troops from the occupied territories and the restoration of Ukrainian control over the border. So, by the way, these are the prerequisites of Minsk arrangements. They are specifically referring to the restoration of Ukrainian control over the borders with Russia and the withdrawal of Russian troops and their proxies. So we are ready for this to happen, but it looks like Putin is not ready. The issue which may cool Russian minds, this is the creation of military capabilities which may create a high price for Putin for any aggressive adventures. And Ukrainian armed forces are doing this throughout these years, starting from 2014, since the time when Yanukovych, in fact, diminished considerably the capabilities of Ukrainian armed forces. And of course, the policy of sanctions. The policy of sanctions may force Putin to be ready for the concessions, to be ready for cooling down his aggressive attitude, and I would say that policy of sanctions, for the time being, were a very important element of the policy of the United States and of the European Union. But if you look at the essence of those sanctions, you will find that there are some very serious and much stronger economic sanctions that have not been applied yet. For example, the isolation of Russia from global banking and financial system, the exclusion of Russia from the SWIFT system. So these are very painful, and by the way, Russia, knowing the possibility of this, they are preparing their financial and banking system for the independent activity. And of course, the restoration of serious military capability of Ukrainian armed forces cannot be done without military assistance from the United States and NATO countries. So unfortunately, there are few countries which are providing military assistance in military hardware to Ukraine. So, and this, of course, is very substantial part. Ukrainian armed forces requires modern military hardware, and first of all, our Air Force. Currently, the United States and the United Kingdom are doing their best in order to increase our military capabilities on the sea, in the Black Sea and in the Azov Sea. And thanks to this assistance, the capabilities of our Navy increased considerably in the sea. Of course, what Russia have done recently, this is contrary to the law of the sea convention. It is contrary to our bilateral agreement between Ukraine and Russia on the common use of Azov Sea and the free access through the Kerch Strait. So now Russia, under no pretext, declared that this strait will be closed to any state or military vessels of any country, including Ukraine, until October this year. So this is a very serious attack against the civilized norm of law of the sea convention. And of course, to dispel all allegations of Russia and all narratives coming from Russia that as though Ukraine is playing with muscles, Ukraine is far from this. We cannot compare our armed forces capabilities with that of Russia. By the way, Russia is the second largest military power in the world. And we are not going to compete with Russia on a military field. So our objective and main objective is exclusively political and diplomatic means. That's what we count on.
Okay. I think this was a very clear statement. My personal impression of possible performance of the Ukrainian military in the last years certainly was that they have improved quite a bit, that they have become a modern and a strong army. But of course, you know, I think the way cannot be a military way between Russia and Ukraine. It must be a political and diplomatic way, as you lined it out. And insofar, there's also the question, you know, I mean, Russia does not have problems and specific relationships only with Ukraine, but also with other neighbors, like situation in Belarus, the situation in South Caucasian region, Georgia, but especially Armenia and Azerbaijan, of course, do occupy Russia. You are in the center of those two regions between Belarus and the Caucasian region. How do you see the development in those countries and Russia's actions and interactions?
Okay, thank you. But before answering this question, allow myself, Werner, to come back to the issue of figures. Because you refer to the figure 150,000 Russian troops. So this figure emerged from the mouth of the Mr. Borys.
Yeah. And
later, his office corrected the figure. The figure is close to 100,000, not 150.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this was a mistake. But now coming back to Belarus and Southern Caucasus, I am following these regions, throughout my career as a foreign minister, as deputy foreign minister, and I must say that talking about Belarus, Belarus of Lukashenko is tangoing and maneuvering at the same time with Russia. And Lukashenko managed to win a couple of years of this policy, promising not doing what Putin wanted to. And finally, this policy seemed to be over because of the huge, massive protests of Belarusians after this August, so-called August last year elections of President of Belarus. So, and this situation seriously undermined internally and externally the possibilities of Lukashenko. As a result of these protests, as a result of Russian pressure, well, Russia is probably calculating that this is the time to reach a final objective of their policy. That is to either to agree on full control of Russia over Belarus on the part of Lukashenko, or substitute Lukashenko with more controllable person. So these, to my mind, are the major objectives of Russia. And it looks like Russia is now very close for this objective. For us in Ukraine, this is a very serious security problem. So we have the security danger from eastern border with Russia, and now we may have the northern border, that is with Belarus, to be fully controlled by Russia. So this will create well, another military and security situation for Ukraine. Now, speaking about the Southern Caucasus, I would like to say that Ukraine is keeping a very close relationship with at least two countries of the region, that is Georgia and Azerbaijan. Together, these countries are members of the so-called Guam community, which comprises Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. Georgia, during these recent years, experienced some political stalemate, especially after parliamentary elections in Georgia. As a result, the parliament was idling, not working properly, because the opposition refused to participate in the parliament. But after the efforts from the European Union and with the mediation of the European Union, this stalemate in Georgia seemed to be over during these recent days. At least it was announced from Brussels that the political solution was found, and to the agreement of opposition, they are going to come back to the normal existence, including in the parliament. And Georgia is pursuing the same objectives as Ukraine is pursuing, that is the full NATO and EU membership. And both countries are being considered by NATO and the European Union as possible members. Of course, there are still conditions, but both countries are being recognized as possible members. As to Azerbaijan and Armenia, it is very difficult to divide between two countries while describing the situation. And I would say that the recent stage of war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh produced a new political and security realities in the Southern Caucasus, as a result of which Armenia has lost occupied territories of Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh, and it caused the political turmoil in Armenia, as a result of which the current Prime Minister Pashinyan, who used to be very popular, announced his readiness to go to the parliamentary elections, which is going to take place this summer. And to finish with Armenia, I would like to say that unlike Azerbaijan, Armenia was always directing its policy on Russia. So the Russian influence is still very high over Armenia. Azerbaijan, after the defeat of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, gained psychological and security victory, establishing the control over considerable part of Nagorno-Karabakh. But at the same time, Russians happen to be everywhere, as well as here. They managed to convince both Azerbaijan and Armenia of their so-called peacekeeping presence. I refer to the so-called peacekeeping presence because never ever Russia might be considered as an unbiased peacekeeper, and the cases of Transnistria is yet another proof of this. So this is about this region.
Yeah, I'm very glad you mentioned also Transnistria, because Russia obviously also mobilized the troops in Transnistria. I mean, this is not a very big number, but still it's the eastern side of Ukraine, and insofar one must not neglect or underestimate it. Yeah, thank you very much for this. Maybe let's go a little bit now to a possible European role. You spoke it out already for Ukraine. It seems to be decisive what America is going to do. We spoke only little about Europe, and there was a certain role in the Minsk Accord and the Normandy format, but as you mentioned it, it did not really work out. So where do you see Europe's role in the future, and what can EU do in order to contribute substantially for stability in Eastern Europe? And when I say in Eastern Europe, I do not only mean Ukraine, but also maybe Belarus and also the Caucasian region.
Yeah, talking about the regional factor, I used to combine together Central and Eastern Europe, which means the countries of Central and Eastern Europe have the same objectives. But talking about the possible influence of the European Union, well, it is an axiom that the candidacy for the EU membership is a very strong incentive for any candidate countries, and the history has proven this. It instigates the candidate countries for making quick reforms along the lines of matching the standards of the European Union. So this is the same relates to the countries of the Central Eastern Europe. So for the European Union, we expect, I mean Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, we expect that the open door policy will be kept by Brussels, and not only in terms of EU, but NATO as well. By the way, this is the official policy of NATO to keep a close, open door policy towards Ukraine and Georgia. And I would say that the European Union is already doing a lot by its concerted, united policy of sanctions against Russia. That is deterring Russia considerably, and this is very important. The European Union is doing a lot in terms of assisting the countries of Eastern Europe, and thus helping to make the way for the reforms much shorter. And the European Union is spreading by its agreements, the association agreement between Ukraine and European Union, between Moldova and European Union, between Georgia and European Union. So this policy is leading to a closer cooperation between these three Eastern European countries and the European Union, and it is like a lighthouse for these three countries, the European Union. And if you ask the people in Ukraine, Moldova or Georgia what are their objectives, and certainly the overwhelming majority will say EU membership. It is even higher than the NATO membership. Of course, for this to happen, we have to do a lot. And in this regard, we need the political will on the part of the European Union, which does not exist from among all EU member states. Not all EU member states are ready to admit the possibility of future membership of Ukraine or Georgia or Moldova to the European Union. Of course, we have to do a lot of homework. That's what we are ready to do. And the new political situation in Ukraine is a very fruitful for this, very substantial for this. But we need one of the factor which is being lacking for the time being from the part of the European Union. That is the possibility of having Ukraine in future a member of the European Union. We do hope that with the time passing it will happen, but I understand that among other things, this is the result of the policy of Russia intimidating the countries of the European Union and NATO member states.
That's at least as it looks like that there's some Russian intention also to make some problems in order to prevent membership with the EU and especially with NATO, of course. I got a question from the public. And the question says, yesterday Ukrainian President Zelensky invited Mr. Putin to meet in Donetsk area. Do you think this is politically correct to take such an action at the moment?
Well, I understand that this has been met very differently, even in Ukrainian society. But from my point of view, Zelensky made a step forward. He indicated that he has no military intentions, that he has the intention to normalize the relationship. And for this, as a responsible head of state, he has to do everything possible, including the possible meeting with Putin. I don't know what might be the response of Putin, but certainly with this step, Zelensky made a very serious, positive I would say, gesture. So now it is for Putin to answer whether he is ready or not.
Yeah. Talking about this, maybe you also can say a few words to Biden's invitation to meet Putin.
I think that as well, traditionally, United States and the former Soviet Union took the special responsibility for the nuclear disarmament, for the peace and stability in the world, and now Russia is trying to assume this responsibility from the former Soviet Union. I think that for Biden doing this, to invite Putin for a meeting in Moscow, might be seen as gesture of a weak partner. But looking from outside, at least from my point of view, this is a gesture of a strong nation, which is certain in its capabilities and abilities, which is determined to deter Russia, and which is determined to stop Russian aggressive provocations. So in combination, by stopping Russia and inviting Russia for a positive, constructive relationship, from my point of view, this is a positive step.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, before I thank you for the whole session, I want to announce our next AIES talk next week on Wednesday at 4 o'clock p.m. It will be in German language on geopolitische Konsequenzen der COVID-19-Krise, the geopolitical consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. And our partner will be Dr. Walter Feichtinger, the president of the Center for Strategic Analysis. We are looking forward to have this discussion on future consequences or immediate consequences also of the COVID-19 crisis for geopolitics. And now I want to thank you, Borys, for your immediate readiness, and not only the readiness, but for your open words, for your frankness, for your analysis. I think it is so important to exchange views in order to make diplomacy able and capable to find solutions in difficult situations. And looking at Ukraine, a major factor for stability and security in Europe, of course, not only for the Ukrainians themselves, but for the whole of Europe. This certainly is and will be a major question. And insofar, we certainly will continue our dialogue also in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much, dear Borys. It was a pleasure to have you at this discussion and to see you next time in Vienna.
Danke schön, and thank you very much, Mr. Minister, Mr. Director.
Okay.
My pleasure to work with you.